If I unmute the mic. Excellent. So yeah, again, lovely to see you all. I'm Nathan. So I'm taking over the second half here. I hope Michael served you well. And if he didn't, blame him, right? I gave him all of this material perfectly prepared. So what we're going to do for this second half is build off everything that we've done already. But we're going to build off of it in a very different kind of way. So in particular, what we've been interested in for this first half is really tracking semantic notions. What we mean by that is, in some sense, we're kind of concerned with truth, with meaning. We're going to give that up. We're going to think about something entirely different, at least for the next 4 weeks. We're going to be concerned with syntactic manipulation of sentences. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and teach you natural deduction. First, we're going to start off with about a 15-minute sales pitch as to why the hell we should care about natural deduction, what it is, and what it's supposed to do. Right? Then the bulk of today is going to be teaching you the rules for this system. It's going to come pretty hard and fast. We're going to try and talk through each rule, and I'll give you a general idea of how these rules work and even what they're rules to do. But again, it's going to be a lot of stuff, and I'm sorry. We've played around with different ways to think about it. The way I've found that works best is to just give you everything up front, and then we kind of play it back as we wheel through it. So we'll go through all of these different rules. That's going to be the bulk of it. If everything works perfectly, then we'll talk about these derived rules. But I want to stress, the derived rules, you don't actually need them. They just are ways to make your life a little bit easier. All we need will be the stuff we get through in section 2. Cool? And you also know the drill, hopefully by now. If you've got questions along the way, just stop. Right? Cool. All right. So, natural deduction, the very idea. What the hell are we even doing? So when we're faced with a TFL argument, we have a beautiful, wonderful sledgehammer of a tool that helps us tell whether the argument's valid or not. Truth tables. You did a bunch of these. You know how to do these. And truth tables are amazing. They really are. But they're limited. They're limited in lots of different ways. One way is, put really bluntly, truth tables don't actually tell you very much about why an argument's valid or invalid. Right? It shows you if there is a valuation where the premises are true and the conclusion's false, that there is one. But it doesn't tell you why. Or even better, if the argument's valid, it doesn't tell you how it is that you can go from the true premises to the truth of the conclusion. What's the connection there? Truth tables don't help. That's one thing. The second thing is, put really bluntly, sometimes it's just really fucking annoying to make a table. Take this argument. This argument's valid. Because it's just, hey, if A1, then C1, and we've just added a bunch of other junk along the way. But note, it's all just conjunctions and disjunctions. So A1 has to be true, and as long as we get C, any of them, we're good. But if we tried to do this with the truth table, that's a lot of paper. So, right, if we're doing TFL, we have limitations, both in terms of kind of the information it's giving us and the practical limitations. And this gets even worse if we think about first-order logic. Right? I'm sure Michael drilled this in, but the actual stuff we can do with interpretations is pretty limited. You were taught how to show that an argument's invalid. How do you show an FOL argument's valid? You ain't doing it with interpretations. You can't. So if we wanted to show that an FOL argument's valid, we need a different tool. So this is where we get to natural deduction. Natural deduction is a particular way of representing an idealized model of reasoning. The aim of a natural deduction system is to show that arguments are valid and other stuff too, but to show that arguments are valid in a way that delivers insight into the reasoning. It's literally going to show you, starting from these inferences, how you can go from them to a conclusion. So it's going to be a map. Here's your premises that you start with. Here are the steps you take to get you to the conclusion. In this way, you can already see how natural deduction immediately addresses that first kind of failure of truth tables. It's showing you how you could get there from here, not just that you can or can't. And that's really cool. The trick is going to be, of course, the steps. And this is where I was talking about the rules. That's what the rules are. The rules are the kind of steps you're permitted to take, the moves you can make. But again, the important thing is just to see what the basic idea is. It's literally showing us, starting from these, this is what you can get to. So what are they meant to do? Well, they're meant to clarify the form and structure of a good argument, of a logical chain of reasoning. They can describe the appropriate means of justifying a conclusion, given some premises. How is it that these premises actually get you to the truth of the conclusion? And they demonstrate how the inference rules that we, idealized, the best versions of we, use, and why they're successful, and how they fit together. So again, that's the kind of core concept here. It's literally going to be, this is how a perfect reasoner who's using very safe, secure steps would go from premises to conclusion. I hate that. Can you guys hear the room underneath us? I hate this building. So how do we do it? How does natural deduction do its job? Well, natural deduction is a way to build formal proofs. What's a formal proof? Well, it's a sequence of sentences, some of which are marked with assumptions, and the last line of which is a conclusion. And it shows us how to derive the conclusion from the premises using good inference steps. That's just a fancy way to say it's basically going to be a kind of system where we've got assumptions, rules for getting us down, and then it's going to end in a conclusion. Okay. I should stress also, Michael probably mentioned this, but when it comes to things like definitions, the ones that might ask you on an exam or anything, they're always in the blue boxes. So if you want to write this down just to know what a formal proof is, sure, but I'm not going to ask you any questions on what is this. I just want you to know roughly what it is. Okay. The core of natural deduction systems, the rules in the game, are inference rules. Inference rules govern the behavior of various connectives. And if we're in FOL, they would also be inference rules for governing the quantifiers and identity. I'm going to tell you right now, we're not going to do natural deduction for first order logic. We're only going to do it for TFL. So all we're going to deal with are rules that let us manipulate sentences featuring connectives. And there's two types. There's introduction rules and badly named elimination rules. Introduction rules let us introduce a particular connective. So we're going to have, for example, a conjunction introduction. That lets us introduce a sentence that features a conjunction as its main operator. Literally add a sentence featuring the relevant operator. Elimination rules, again, badly named, let us use a sentence featuring that operator. So conjunction elimination lets us take a sentence that features a conjunction and do something to it. In this case, it's going to be break it in half and get the conjuncts. So really, introduction rules give us new complex sentences. Elimination rules let us use complex sentences to do something. If you like, these are better kind of thought of as exploitation rules. We're going to exploit the connective to do something. Every rule I'm going to teach you is going to be one of these two. So far, so good? Okay. So let's give you an example just to show you what a natural deduction proof is going to look like. First things first. What do we think? Is this argument valid? Invalid? Valid? Invalid? What do you think? Thumbs up, thumbs down. It's valid, right? It's valid. If the first two premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true, right? You can even see it. So our first premise tells us a conjunction is true. Conjunctions are only true if both conjuncts are true. Second premise, right? If the antecedent's true, then the consequent also has to be true. So we get A, we get C, cool. Conclusion's true if the premises are two. See it? Now note, the reasoning I just walked you through, that's what the proof's going to show. So here's how we do a natural deduction proof. We start off by writing down our assumptions. We write them in a vertical line. We list them numerically. So we've got 1 and 2. After you've listed them, draw a line underneath them. This is our assumption line. This is going to be really handy because basically it's telling us everything above the assumption line is something we're taking for granted for the sake of the proof. Everything below it, we're going to derive, or it's going to be a new assumption. So this is literally how we're going to build these. Note that we're assuming these are true. We don't care if they are or aren't. We're saying if they're true, then stuff's going to follow. Okay. So we draw our assumption line. Next thing we do, we drop our proof line. Our proof line's a vertical one. It's literally just how we're going to follow from the assumptions down to our conclusion. It's going to end at the last numbered line, which is the conclusion we want, the result that we want to get to. Everything below this assumption line, again, it's going to be either something we derive using a rule or a new assumption that we make. Good so far? Okay. So again, everything below assumption line, something derived or something new that we're going to assume. So let's talk about how we do the derivation. So, as I said, right, if premise 1 is true, it's a conjunction. If conjunctions are true, both conjuncts are true. So we know from 1 that A must be true. Because 1 is A conjunction B. So A's got to be true. So that's what we do for line 3. We extract one of the conjuncts using a rule. In this case, conjunction elimination. For each sentence that we derive via a rule, we write it down, we number it, we list the rule that we used. And this is important because basically what we're doing by listing the rule is we're saying, here's how we did it. It's the roadmap. And we also list what sentences we used. For conjunction elimination, you only need the conjunct, right? Because you're breaking it in half and taking one of the conjuncts. So, what do you think we'll do next? B? Yeah, we want B, right? We're going to get B at line 4. And how are we going to get B at line 4? Same rule? Same fucking rule. Right? Same damn thing. We just need both parts. Does everybody see it? So, same thing. Right? Because notably, if you use an elimination rule, it's not like you've lost the sentence. You've just done something to it. Cool. Now, what's next? Yeah. How are we going to get C?
By the elimination with the line 2 and 4.
Nice. Great. So remember when we talked through it a second ago? I said, hey, if the conditional is true, if 2 is true, and the antecedent's true, which is what 4 is telling us, then the consequent also has to be true as well. C has to be true. Do we know why? So let's think. Right? Remember the truth tables for a conditional. What's the one time the conditional is false?
The first thing is false and the other one is true.
Other way around. Other way around.
Always false.
Yeah. So the trick, The trick, Michael probably mentioned this, right? The trick is to remember about breaking promises. The only time a promise gets broken is if the first thing happens and the promise doesn't get followed.
What if I too far?
So again, conditional is true. That's what we've assumed by drawing it above our assumption line.
In the first case,
Well, if we know that the conditional is true, and we know the first part's true, the second part has to be true. Because otherwise, it would be the one case where the conditional is false. So 2 and 4 together give us C. And hey, we're right there. We're basically at the end. What's our last step? Yeah.
We introduce a conjunction with names.
Exactly. Remember where we wanted to go. We wanted to get to the conjunction. So that's what we do. We proved that A must be true. We proved that C must be true. So cool, it's easy. C conjunction A must be true. We take the two, we staple them together with a conjunction, and touchdown Jesus. So note, what we've done is we've constructed a proof that you can follow using very simple steps to show you how to go from the premises to the conclusion. If you can do this, you can do Nautsch-Reduction. The trick's just going to be there's more rules. But it's no problem. It's just figuring out the rules. Okay. Before we go on, are there any questions about this? Feeling good so far? If not, don't worry. We're going to talk a lot more about it. So. Okay. That's it. This is what Nautsch-Reduction proofs are going to look like. Again, the rest of it's going to be just more flashes and whistles, right? Going to be more rules. Our beautiful little proof. First one done. Look at us. So now, let's talk about the rules. I'm going to introduce you to all of them. The ones to start, we've already played with. We're going to talk about conjunction introduction and elimination, and conditional elimination. We've already used them in the proof that we just did. Excuse me. So here's our first rule, conjunction introduction. It's a schematic rule. What that means, note that A and B are written in my sexy little swash font. Did Michael tell you about the sexy swash font? So what this means is, of course, A and B can stand for any sentence at all, simple or complex. So this is telling us if you have two sentences on your proof line, any of them, we don't care where they are, how far they're separated. If you've already got two on that vertical line, then you can staple them together with a conjunction. You use conjunction introduction, and you cite the two sentence lines. We did this a minute ago, right? Remember C conjunction A? We saw that already. So, again, this is the structure of all the rules. They're going to be schematic. They're always going to say, hey, doesn't matter if there's a big space between the sentences we're using, we don't care. They just need to be on the line. So that's conjunction introduction. It gives us a conjunction. Here's the other rule for conjunction. Conjunction introduction doesn't really matter about order. You can play around. So you can get B conjunction A or A conjunction B. Doesn't really matter. The other rule for conjunction, unsurprisingly, we've already used it. Conjunction elimination. It says if you have a conjunction on your proof line, you can break it and get one of the conjuncts. Note, if you want to get both conjuncts, you've got to use the rule twice. You can only get one part at a time. Again, we did this in our sample proof. We used it once to get A, and then we used it again to get B. And note, it doesn't matter how complex sexy swash font A or sexy swash font B are. We don't care. All that matters is that if the sentence has a conjunction as its main operator, then we can break it and get the parts. Okay. Good for conjunction? We start with it because it's the easiest one. So, on to our next one. The other rule that we used. I forgot. A fun example. When we might use conjunction, introduction, and elimination. This is a lovely valid argument, but it is not a fun truth table to make. But it's a 4-line proof. Does everybody see it? It's actually really easy. It's literally just, if you read the big things inside, it's P and Q, therefore Q and P. If you just replace the really hideous sentence, right? So read that one as P and that one as Q. It's really easy, but it looks terrifying. And it would be just a jerk of a truth table. But it's easy to do with this. Just a fun little example. Okay, so spooling back. Our third rule, conditional elimination. Conditional elimination is our first one where we need to do a little bit of work. We have a conditional, and if we have the antecedent, we can derive the consequence. It's worth repeating that. If we have a conditional and the antecedent, then we can get the consequence. Note, we cannot go the other way around. A conditional is being true, and the consequence being true does not guarantee the antecedent's truth. So if you've got conditional and first part, you get second, but not vice versa. Cool? Things to note when we use this rule. Going to be a little bit picky here. You need to cite the conditional and the antecedent in that order. I mean, between friends, I'm not going to mark you down on the final exam if you write it in the opposite order, but it's good to get in good habits. Right? So cite the conditional, then the antecedent. Good so far? Look at us, we're rocking. 3 rules. So, now, it's worth noting, doesn't matter the order that the parts appear. You could have the antecedents and then somewhere down the line, the conditional. That's fine. As long as you have both bits, you can get the consequence. Do not care. But no, we still cite the conditional first.
So in question 1, BN are
Okay.
B is the basic natural treasure. Now in question 2,
Now, already the hard part. Good timing. Hey. Okay. Everything we've done so far relies on this idea of just using stuff that's on the proof line. Just taking what we started with and kind of manipulating it on one line. But a lot of stuff that we're going to want to do requires a little bit more work. So here's where the first bit of fun comes in. Okay. Remember I said everything below the assumption line is either going to be derived via a rule or a new assumption. What the hell is this? I'm going to tell it to you in informal terms before we talk about it. When we add a new assumption, what we do is we build a little baby proof inside our proof. Somebody call exhibit. That's a good joke. It's older than most of you, so it's fine if you don't get it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start a subproof. And our subproof is going to have an assumption line with only one assumption. And that's going to be the new thing we're adding. And we're going to play around inside the little baby proof until we get some results. And then we're going to seal it off and never talk about it again. So this is a way we can get additional assumptions. Try and talk you through it. So here's an example. What do we think? Valid argument? Yay, nay?
Two, three.
50-50 chance, guys. Yeah. So it's going to work either way. So here's the neat thing. Because remember, the test is it possible to make the premises true and the conclusion false? So premise is true. A's got to be true. So now let's see. If B is true, cool, then the conclusion's true. Right? Because the antecedent's true and the consequence true. Yeah? You see it? And if B's false, conditional's true. So if B is true, B's false, it still works. This one's valid. So let's prove it. I'll give it to you informally. Basically did, right? If B is true, given that we've already assumed A, we know that we can get their conjunction. So that means that if B, then B conjunction A. So let's show it. So we start off the same way. We write our premises down, we draw our assumption line, we drop our proof line. Now the second step, what we're going to do is start our baby proof. We're going to open a subproof. We open a subproof by drawing a new assumption line. And note, we also build a new subproof line. This subproof line has to stop before we get to the end. We want to just kind of show, hey, if you also gave me this additional assumption, I could do something more. If B is also true. So we do this, again, syntactically, lexically. The way we write it is we pull the line over, we draw it just underneath, and this is going to be our subproof line. Now we're going to continue both of these lines down, because everything that's in the subproof is also sort of going on inside our big proof. So, based on what we've got here, what can we do at line 3? Yeah. Nice! So what's the rule called?
It's called conjunction introduction.
Exactly, right? So we can use conjunction introduction at line 3, and what's it going to give us? A conjunction B, right? A conjunction B. So here's the cool thing. If you're in the subproof, you can use everything that's on any line to your left. So we can get A conjunction B. And now, hey, look at what we've shown. What the subproof from 2 to 3 shows us is that if B is true, then B conjunction A is true. Which sure looks a hell of a lot like what we want to get in our conclusion. So here's what we do. We say, hey, I'm finished with this subproof. We close it. We discharge our commitment to the additional assumption that we started the subproof with. And we walk away from it. Now, of course, when we walk away from it, we want to get something out of it. And in this case, what we're going to get out of it is a conditional. If B is true. If B is true, then we get B conditional, B conjunction A. So, what we've done here, by going through our little baby subproof, is we've shown that, hey, if B is true, I could get this conjunction. Which is literally what we derive at line 4. Now, I know that subproof kind of thing it's weird, it's a little bit tricky. But again, do we see the kind of underlying thought there? It's effectively, we're doing a proof inside of our proof. Yeah.
Does it matter to use the comma on the other one? line.
Good. Yes, it does. And we'll talk about it when we get to the rule. But yes. So importantly, when we have the comma, it's citing two lines. When we have this dash in between, it's citing all of the lines in between. In this case, there's only the two, but it could, in theory, be way longer. If you ever see this, it's citing a whole subproof. It's citing a sequence of sentences. But again, to spool back, the important thing is, at this point, when we've moved to sentence 4, we have finished with our subproof. We can no longer use it. We can talk about the whole thing, as we did here, but we can't talk about any individual sentences in it. So one thing we couldn't do, for example, is this. This is a no-no. Once you've closed a subproof and gotten what you want out of it and moved to the left, everything that's in it is dead to you. You can no longer use any of those individual sentences. You can talk about the whole subproof, but all the individual parts, they're gone. So we couldn't do this because sentence 2 is verboten. Again, it's a little tricky, but I hope we can start to see the basic idea. Note, we just did it with 2, but we can go nuts. If you really wanted to, you could have subproofs in your subproofs in your subproofs. All we do is we just keep lines to the right, and then eventually we're going to have rules that let us go back to the left. Beyonce rules.
So the last one is not possible.
This red one, that's a no-no. Because again, it's citing an individual line in a closed subproof. Cannot do that. So what you can do is you can cite whole subproofs, but not individual lines. Yeah. Good. So we did talk about it at the top. But the big idea is when we're thinking about truth tables for TFL, right? They're limited in terms of practical usage. Just build a really, really big-ass truth table. It's going to take a long time. But the other thing is truth tables don't actually show you how the reasoning works. Why these premises guarantee this conclusion. And by building this proof, what we're showing is this is the steps you would take in the chain of reasoning to go from premise to conclusion. Something that truth tables just don't let you do. That's the big idea. The other big upshot, which is something we're not going to cover, unfortunately, is if you remember for FOL, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can't do. You couldn't show an argument's valid using interpretations. Notch deduction gives you a way to do that. So it fills in all the gaps we can't do with interpretations. That's the big upside. Cool. Okay. So far so good? You feeling okay? Note, we've only really hit 3 rules, but we're still doing fine. Right? We just got, for every connective, there's going to be introduction and elimination rules, right? We've already got 1. We have the introduction and elimination rules for conjunction, and we have the elimination rule for the conditional. But I've also just implicitly taught you the introduction rule for the conditional. So let's talk about some of these. There's an intermediate slide, something I mentioned already. When we're doing subproofs, go nuts. Invent as many as you want. Keep going. Subproof. It's fine. And you can close them and just be done with them whenever you want. Right? Try and get something out of it. Make it useful. But if you don't, it's fine. It's just wasted paper. So, let's talk about the introduction and elimination rules for the 3 more connectors. Okay? Yeah. We'll do these and then we'll take our break. I know. Again, I'm sorry. As I said at the top, this is hard and I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you. And that's okay, right? That's why we're going to take 2 weeks. We're going to talk about it a lot. We're going to do a lot of practice problems with it till we get it. So don't stress if it's not clicking right away. It's fine. So, the next rule I want to teach you, one we already did, conditional introduction. Conditional introduction is going to be a rule where we use a subproof. So here's what it looks like. Note again, the same structure. These are syntactic, they're structural. So we don't care what sentences sexy swash font A or B are. They could be as simple or as complex as we like. But conditional introduction says if you have a subproof that starts with A and that ends with B, we don't care how long or how short it is, starts with A, ends with B, you can close the subproof and get a conditional B. Because what the subproof tells you is that if A is true, you can get to B. If A is true, you can get to B.
No? Why?
So look at us. 2 out of the 5 connectives already done. We've got the introduction eliminations for conjunction and the introduction elimination rules for the conditional. Now the biconditional, which is going to be our next one, very straightforward. Because the biconditional, well, what is the biconditional? It's just the connection, it's just the conditional going both ways, right? So that's it. That's all it's going to be.
David,
Yes.
shouldn't there be a conditional introduction rule when A is false?
Good. So here's the neat thing. We don't deal with cases where the sentences are false. All we're showing is that if the sentence is true, then you can get to this, which is what the conditional says. So one of the things that's going to happen is if we have sentences that are always false, we're going to be able to do something very fun. It's coming. But this is kind of neat. So I think Michael, in the last lecture, talked to you about, hey, why do we even care about truth? Effectively, I'm giving you a system where we do not care about truth. We're just saying, if you have these sentences, you can use these rules to get these other sentences. Are the first ones true or false? Don't care. That's somebody else's problem. I'm just playing my little game. That's a very blunt way to put it, but it might be useful. Okay, to come back to, actually, a point that was raised earlier, note that this is also the first rule where we have to cite the whole subproof, rather than just individual lines. Because it's the subproof that shows us the conditional holds. It shows us how to go from A to B. Okay. So, there's our conditional introduction. Biconditional introduction. Biconditional introduction is literally just, hey, the conditional goes both ways. So you're going to have 2 subproofs. One that starts with A and ends with B, like M through N. And one that starts with B and ends with A. Yeah. Good. So these are just variables for numbers, right? So that could be line 1, 2, 3, and 4. They could be lines, 17, 34, 80, and 82. We don't care. That's just a figure. So again, if we're doing conditional introduction or biconditional introduction, it's literally just a conditional introduction twice. Makes sense, right? That's what the connective is. Note here, because we're introducing the biconditional, we need to cite both subproofs. That is, one subproof that gives you the arrow this way, one subproof that gives you the arrow that way. That makes sense, yeah?
Yeah, there are 2 first 2 big breakdowns and
So, we've got the biconditional introduction. What's biconditional elimination going to look like? It says if you have a biconditional, and then either side, you can get the other side. So if you've got A biconditional B, and you've got A, you can derive B.
With a player Q, best result.
And if you've done A biconditional B and you've got B, you can get A.
What
Makes
is
sense.
utility? A
Remember, the biconditional is happy if both sides have the same truth value. So if you know one side's true, the other side must be as well. And note here, because all we need is just the individual lines, we're back to citing just the lines.
If you the
It's basically a version of conditional elimination.
plus
Just in this case, we can eliminate whichever side we
3
want to
over
get.
4. And now, in order to answer the question with
Cool so
the
far?
right response, we have to compare
Yes,
with
please.
the
I'd like
expression.
to know assumption line under the
Good.
conditional.
So in these cases, right, it's schematic. So it could be that this is above the assumption line, or maybe they're both above the assumption line. Doesn't really matter. When we're playing with these rules, and note this is sort of true with all of them. The sentences we could be using, some of them could be assumptions, some of them could be derived, all of them could be assumptions, all of them could be derived. We don't care. If they're on the line, you can use this rule, wherever. Okay. Good so far. Okay. Let's talk about the bicondition. Disjunction. Disjunction is the easiest rule. Well, second easiest rule. Disjunction says, hey, if you've got a sentence, fuck it. Bolt on whatever you want. We don't care. If you know that A is true, you know what's going to be true? A or eh. You don't care. Because A is already enough to do the job. Biconditionals are cheap. Biconditionals are cheap. So if you have a sentence, then you can get that sentence or whatever you want. And again, should be pretty familiar because biconditional so easy to make true. If even one side of the biconditional is true, then the or is the case. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I'm saying the wrong word, aren't I? Disjunction. Got it stuck in my head and now I'm just repeating. Disjunctions, easy. They're cheap. They're cheap. So, again, if we have disjunction introduction, all we need, a sentence, bolt on whatever you want after. It's totally fine. Okay. Problem for disjunction elimination. Disjunctions are cheap. That means when we know a disjunction is true, we don't necessarily know why. So the ease of disjunction introduction is offset by the difficulty of disjunction elimination. To put it another way, it's hard to know why a disjunction is true. If you know that A or B, you don't know if it's because of A, it's because of B, or because both A and B. This is the flip side to them being so easy to make true. This is a problem if we're trying to do natural deduction. Because that sounds a lot like we need to be concerned with meaning, with truth. We don't want to do that. So, what do we do instead? Well, here's the thought. Suppose that we could show, so you know A or B. Suppose we could show that if you started with A, you're going to get to C. And also that if you started from B, you could get to C. Well, then it wouldn't matter. Then it wouldn't matter why A or B is true. Because both routes get you to C. Put another way. Cool, you can take the coastal road, or you can go over the mountains. But either way, you end up in town. So no matter which way you go, you get to town. If I know that, and I know you're going that way, I don't really care which way you go. I know where you're going to end up. So our disjunction elimination rule is going to use that idea. We are going to know, no matter whether you go the A route or the B route, you end up at C. So here's our disjunction elimination. It is hideous. Let's talk through it. If you have a disjunction on your proof line, as an H, and then you can build two subproofs, one of which goes through one disjunct and gets to a destination, and the other that goes through the other disjunct and gets to a destination, then you know that destination follows from the disjunction no matter what.
Those subgroups are both like only one line,
Always just one over. So notably, these sorts of rules only let you go one line left. We don't have any rules that are going to let us go multiple lines back. You can only ever move in or out by one per line. Be easier when we talk about some examples, so hold the thought, we'll come back to it. But again, we see the idea. So the thought here is if you have a disjunction on the proof line, and you can show that it doesn't matter which way you go, but you're going to get to the same destination, then you know that that result follows from the disjunction. We do not care why the disjunction is true or how it's true. We know that no matter what, you're going to end up at C. It's pretty clever, because what this lets us do is reason from the disjunction regardless of why it's true. We don't care. So note here what you have to do citation-wise. You need to cite the disjunction and both subproofs. Okay. So, yes?
Because you're never able to get A or B from this.
Unless it turns out that it doesn't matter which one of the two you get, the result you get to is A or B. Right? So if it turns out, one really easy one, right, is if, say, both disjuncts are sentence A. Cool, then you're going to get A there, and A will follow. That's a really boring one, but that would be a way to go to. Yeah. Okay. So, before we break, again, we did the conjunction, introduction, elimination. We did conditional introduction, elimination, biconditional introduction, elimination, and disjunction introduction, elimination. All that's left is our big weird boy, negation. I'm going to talk about that after the break. But I want to stress, before we break, do not worry if it's not clicking yet. We have lots more time to talk about it, and I am throwing a lot of stuff at you very quickly. Okay? We're going to talk more about it. So it's 36 now, so let's take a 10-minute break to 46. We'll come back in 10. Cool.